Welcome to Soya and Baila's world, where real talk meets real laughs. It's raw, real, relevant. From trending topics to untold stories, we dive deep, go off script, and say what you're really thinking. Whether it's culture, chaos, or candid combos, we're here to keep it raw, real, and ridiculously fun. New episodes drop weekly. Catch every episode on YouTube. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe on YouTube.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Soya and Baila's World podcast. Soya, again, is not available. She's running for public office, so she's out there electioneering at the moment. But we are here, of course, with my honored co-host, Baila, and we've got a wonderful and very interesting guest tonight, and she's going to bring that in and introduce us. Please, Baila, by all means.
So it gives me tremendous honor to welcome Rabbi Yaakov Menken. Rabbi Menken serves as the Executive Vice President of the Coalition for Jewish Values, which is the largest rabbinic public policy organization in America, representing over 2,500 traditional Orthodox rabbis. In May 2025, which was just a few weeks ago, he was appointed by President Donald Trump to the Advisory Board of Religious Leaders for the U.S. Religious Liberty Commission, making him one of the only 4 Orthodox Jewish leaders on the panel. Rabbi Menken regularly appears on leading national and international TV and radio networks, and his op-eds have been featured in every major conservative publication in America. So before we get to the topic we want to talk about, I know that our audience is going to be curious to know if you could possibly tell us a little bit about the Coalition for Jewish Values and what that's all about.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you very much for having me. Coalition for Jewish Values was created actually during the first months of the first Trump administration in 2017. It was a reaction to individuals on the Jewish left, progressive individuals, claiming that their own values, their own progressive thinking is Jewish values. And whatever they say is what the Bible says. And of course, they were busy promoting ideas which go directly contrary to what Yiddishkeit actually teaches us. So it was time for a group of rabbis to gather together. And, you know, we got to 2,500 relatively quickly because there are certain things that are so basic. It doesn't matter if you're Sephardi or Ashkenazi. It doesn't matter if you're Yekka or Litvish or Hasidish. It doesn't matter which Hasidus. There are certain basics that we all agree on, because you can't open a Chumash and fail to notice Zachar and Nekeva bara Oisam. You know, something as basic as that. There are 2 genders, male and female. There's an awful lot of people in America today who are confused about something so trivial as that. And somebody had to stand up.
President Trump did acknowledge that, and did say that right at the beginning.
I will, if you want me to jump right into how politically sensitive that is, let me just finish off the first point by saying, you know, we're obviously very focused on just saying the honest truth about anti-Semitism, that free Palestine is the new Heil Hitler. It all means kill the Jews, and that's what this is about. You know, so we covered those issues, but we do the family policy issues. So, of course, those who are biblically focused amongst the non-Jewish community obviously gravitate towards us. The Frum community has an obvious natural interest. We're always looking for more rabbis. We have a rabbinic circle. And anyone, if you learned in yeshiva, especially after marriage, for 3 days, it doesn't matter because they called you rabbi. We're not looking for smicha certificates. We're looking for guys who know how to learn. Because if you do know how to learn, you know that boycotting Israel is boycotting the Jews, and boycotting the Jews is anti-Semitic. There are certain things which are so debated out in the public sphere and so obvious to us in our community that somebody had to be standing up for that basic Pashup shot, really simple things that we all know to be true. To return to what you said, let me just go with what you Abraham said about Trump pointing out that there are two genders. The heads of the reform movement declared in response to that actually for Reform Jews, it's a religious obligation to recognize a person's preferred gender pronouns.
My God.
They said it's a religious obligation to recognize a person's preferred gender. Now, wait a minute. This is the Reform movement. They don't believe it's a religious obligation to keep Shabbos.
Right.
They don't think it's a religious obligation to keep kashrus. In fact, they don't think it's a religious obligation to keep Jewish law, particularistic Jewish law, in any area.
Well, they have just by saying that.
But this they do. This is a religious issue.
So wait a minute.
But this is not only a violation of Jewish law. This is a violation of what the Christians believe in law, because they believe in the Bible too, and the Bible said it explicitly. He created them man and woman.
It's common sense too.
It's Judeo-Christian
it's biology. It follow the science. It doesn't matter what perspective they're running against all of it. How much more proof do you need that their religion is progressivism rather than Judaism?
Right.
They're going to find you a Bible quote to dress up their progressive ideas, and if they can't find one, they'll refer to Tikkun Olam. It's somehow repairing the world. Whatever they believe to be correct is fixing the world, and therefore what God wants you to do. Never mind that when we daven, it's L'sakein Olam b'malchus shakai, that, there's somebody running the show here, and it's not us. But that's what they believe. Their beliefs are progressivism, and because there was no organization in our place speaking out for what authentic Jewish ideas are, the average non-Jew thought that all Jews are progressive, that all Jews believe in this nonsense. Because, the Aguda, the OU, they're worried about things like, they're fighting for important things like synagogue security and funding for kids' education and security funding for our schools. They can't afford to, at the same time, get into an argument with other, with erstwhile allies on things like school funding, because they're going to talk about what marriage looks like.
Right.
So somebody has to talk about what this looks like in the name of the Jews. Right. And according to a women's organization, actually, we are the only Jewish organization on the national level fighting to keep men out of women's sports.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
Because all the other, they're going to wait until it's men in the women's side of the shul. We've already had, very sadly, a case in New York where there was a school where there was a certain woman who was teaching in the school, and they discovered that woman isn't.
Yeah. Rabbi, that's very impressive, and it's great to know that you're out there. We have an organization as this. And since we, as a podcast, and back when we were still a radio show, we had a radio show for 2.5 years. I know about it. We were the flagship program on Zeb Brenner's radio network. That's what we had. Some big wigs, actually. We had everybody from Senator D'Amato to
Hey, what do we got now?
We had some very, very respectable big wigs as well, in addition to you, Rabbi.
Chopped liver.
No, God forbid.
But Rabbi, so since we cater to a mixed crowd, this is what you're talking about is fundamental not only to real, authentic Judaism, it's fundamental to the Judeo-Christian values as a whole, to authentic Christianity as well, to authentic Christians that actually are Bible-believing and Bible-practicing Christians. So it goes
if we're giving Zeb Brenner a shout-out, which he does deserve.
I'm not giving a particular shout-out.
I was actually a radio host.
Okay.
In the very early days, I have an organization. We do Kiruv. It's now 99% online. We're responsible for Torah.org and Torah Media, other Jewish outreach and education websites. And when I was just started, one thing I did to popularize the program, I said, gee, let me do a radio show. And he had he had a brief stint where he was managing a radio station called WLIR in Rockland County.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I was one of his hosts on WLIR for several months.
Well, we had our own program.
That was after Rabbi Spivak, I imagine.
It was concurrent with Rabbi Spivak.
Oh, I see.
Rabbi Spivak was Allah Shalom was on that station and on that. I know him personally.
Well,
I
Rabbi, we had our own
him.
program for 2.5 years. We were a flagship program. We ran for either 1, 2, or 3 nights a week for 2.5 years until Soya just got overwhelmed because she's chief of staff, I can't say, for a particular New York public official, and she's just working 24/7, so she just couldn't handle it, and so she said that's the end of the line. But anyway, let's focus on our subject tonight. You made a beautiful introduction, and I want to talk about, somehow it seems as though, and this is probably related to the fact that there are so many Jews out there that are liberal progressives because they don't identify in any way with authentic Judaism the way I see it and the way I believe you see it, Rabbi, and the way Baila sees it. It seems to me as though the Muslims are winning the war of public affairs. They are ahead. They're coming out ahead in every way.
Public opinion.
Public opinion war, right? Excuse me. Public opinion. Everything that they do, they accuse the Jews of doing. For example, colonialism. Let me just put a word out there. Now, let me read the actual definition of colonialism. Colonialism is a practice of domination where a powerful country or nation establishes and maintains control over another country, territory, or people. This control is typically political, economic, and often involves settlement of its citizens in authorized land. Now, let's take a look back for a second. Colonialism. Who owns the land of Israel? Who received it originally by the owner of the entire world? God himself, not the children of Abraham, Ishmael, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Jewish people, who have had a presence there for thousands of years, predating King David and his Davidic dynasty, predating that yet, and has not had it has an uninterrupted presence that has gone on till today. Prior to 1948, there have always been Jews on the land of Israel. Who has been there on the land of Israel all along? Okay, it was granted by God. It has always been ours. It has always belonged to the Jewish people. Okay, given, and the deed is there in the Bible, in the Torah. The deed is written in black and white. Now, it's interesting how the so-called Palestinians, and I always refer to them on the radio, so-called Palestinians, because let's talk the truth, Rabbi. Palestinians had not existed prior to 1964. They came into being. They were created strictly for the purpose to be used as pawns to, in some way, attempt to invalidate Israel, make it, say that Israel is not properly existent, to delegitimize Israel, and that's what they created as a pawn to do that in its attempt, in the Islamo-fascist attempt to destroy Israel, take over Israel, and get rid of all the Jews in Israel.
And now, before 1948, Palestine, as it was called, was under British colonization. When in 1917, the British first occupied Palestine. So
that's right. They took it from the Turks, but they were always Jews.
Come and say
Baila,
that it's theirs.
Baila, there was an eternal Jewish presence. There never was a time that there wasn't a Jewish presence. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but always there. Rabbi, why are they getting away with this? Why are they flipping the script to the extent that they are pointing at us and saying, you, the Jews, are colonialists. You have invaded ours. You're taking ours, whereas we are the victims of your colonialism. It's just the other way around.
In psychological
Rabbi,
terms,
please.
It's projection. That's really what it is. But
I would like
Rabbi Menken,
explain what's happening here, Rabbi. Please.
Okay, I want to answer it in two ways, because there's one that we really can't control, and there's one that we can. The one that we cannot control is the existence of something called anti-Semitism. HaKadosh Baruch Hu placed anti-Semitism in the world. There was someone who quipped, if the Yidden forget to make Kiddush, the Goyim will make Havdalah. Like if we don't recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world and runs our world, and we think, Kochi v'yotzim yodi, we can do it our way, we can do whatever we want, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to come up with reminders for us.
Well, then, Rabbi, I beg your pardon, Rabbi, I beg your pardon, but I must interrupt. I must ask you that, because that sounds to me almost as though it's almost like saying God, in essence, at least it may sound like that to some people, himself is maybe somewhat anti-Semitic.
But it's not about anti-Semitism per se. It's
Okay.
about the idea that the Jews are supposed to represent something different. We are supposed to live different lives. We are supposed to be quiet models of what following HaKadosh Baruch Hu and listening to him and civilized values look like.
Kindness, morality, goodness, honesty.
Those who want goodness gravitate towards the Jews. Look at the founding fathers. The very fact that they call it Judeo-Christian ethics. My quip about that is that it's cultural appropriation, because it's all Jewish ideas.
Well, Jesus
of which
was Jewish.
Christianity, if because that's cultural appropriation. The people who claim now that it's a bad thing are the same people who were telling us about multiculturalism 15 years ago. So they can't remember that they themselves said learning from other cultures is a great thing. Can I ask you a simple question? Where would the Jewish community be without Chinese food?
I think we would survive without Chinese food.
You know what I'm saying. Cultural appropriation is a great thing. You benefit from other cultures teaching you a better way to do things. And when you imitate that better practice, that is how humanity progresses. If you really want progress, you take the best ideas from each culture and you move forward with those best ideas. You don't invent and reinvent and demonize the guys who are getting it right. And in fact, if you go to the founding fathers and the values of a first world civilization, things like respecting the rights of every individual, saying that no individual is above the law, that every human life is sacred, and that peace is superior to war, all of these things are the values of the Jews. They're the values of the Torah. They're not something that somebody came up with sitting in a hut somewhere. It's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us.
This is right there in the Bible in black and white.
And in fact, the founding fathers refer to Sefer Dvarim, what they call the book of Deuteronomy, more often than any other book, because it's the source of values and understanding values. You get it from Torah. And that is why, that is what Yiddishkeit stands for. That is what Yidden are supposed to do. That is what Yidden are supposed to model.
We are supposed to be a light unto the nations.
That's it. Exactly.
Right.
It's not about being superior to the nations. It's about being different.
Rabbi, pardon me. Now I want to go back to part B. What about this flip of the narrative, which seems to put us always on the defensive end, whereas I believe we should be going on the offensive?
Well, part of the problem there is simply that, the Jews being their own worst enemy, and this tendency.
What do you mean by that?
It's even described in Tanakh, the Yidden who do more damage to Yiddishkeit than anybody else. The burning of the Talmud. Do you think the Pope actually knew what it says in the Talmud? He needed an apostate Jew to come lie to him about what the Talmud contained for there to be a decree for the burning of the Talmud.
Right.
A huge loss to Yiddishkeit, and it was created by a Jew. That is how this stuff works. And
Bernie Sanders, others.
Besides the fact that you have Jews working against our best interests, the fact of the matter is that because we have morals, we tend to be too nice. We don't call them the barbarians that they are. We don't call them the Nazis that they are. Ilhan Omar is an actual Nazi. Stop pretending otherwise.
Maybe we should. Maybe that's
no. That's it. I'm saying more than perhaps we should. I'm saying we definitely should.
We should.
And the fact that we allow this stuff to fester, the great Jewish organizations are supposed to be protecting us. The first time that you had a university teaching a course about Palestine was the time for all the Jewish organizations to call upon the government to stop providing federal funding to that school.
Sure,
that never should have been allowed to fester to the stage where we are at now. Because the whole narrative, Israel has never been at war with Palestine. Palestine, to go back to the history of Palestine, Palestine is nothing more than a European colonialist name for the Jewish homeland.
Equivalent to the Chronicles of Narnia, if you remember that.
Well, it is. Look, it's derived from the Philistines, who were an uncultured people, who were there. Philistine actually, it comes from
Palestinians, so-called Palestinians, are not descendants even of these Philistines.
Let's go through the whole picture here.
Please.
Lefalesh, a Pelishtim, was an invader. It means invader. Some say it was ancient Greeks who had come over and invaded Canaan, the homeland of the Jews, and started to take it over. And then, when the Greco-Roman colonialists, when they came and invaded the Holy Land, they used the name Palestine specifically to disenfranchise the Jews from Judea, Yehuda from Yehudim, Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael, all of these things. By the way, the world's largest, most obvious monument to hatred and bigotry is what? The Arch of Titus. In Rome, they celebrate the destruction of the temple, pillaging of the temple, the enslavement of the Jews.
Right. We mourn we mourn those days, and they celebrate it.
That monument is nothing more than a monument to hatred and bigotry, but it's against Jews, which is why nobody calls for it to be torn down. But that's what the name Palestine stands for. That's what the name Palestine has always stood for. When they and by the way, genocide. You are one thing, Abraham, you are wrong about one thing. There definitely were Palestinians before 1964. There was a Palestinian Talmud. Who were the Palestinians when the Palestinian Talmud was written? Jews.
My mother was born in Israel prior to 1948.
Your mother had a Palestinian passport. Exactly. A Palestinian in 1930. When I already did the Gemara. There was a Palestinian Gaonate. Right. There were the holy cities of Palestine. They cannot find you a Palestinian scholar or theologian from prior to the 20th century on Wikipedia. But of course, they can find a dozen of them if you look for rabbis in the Holy Land. Right. There was a lot of Palestinian scholars and theologians. They were all Jews. So they've reinvented history.
Why are we not going on the offensive?
In the 1930s.
Why are we not taking that mode?
In the 1930s, the Palestine Post is today's Jerusalem Post. Miss Palestine spoke Yiddish. The Palestinian soccer team spoke Hebrew. A Palestinian meant a Jew. In fact, in 1945, Palestinian goods were the things that the Arab League boycotted. So a Palestinian did not mean an Arab until Arafat reinvented history in 1964 with the help of the KGB. And people don't want to hear history. The problem is they will go with a completely unrealistic and ridiculous version of history. And by the way, I've spoken about this on campus. They're absolutely convinced, some of them, that the Israelis are the genocidal actor in this.
Rabbi, pardon me. We're running a little low on time. Why can't we flip the script and go on the offensive? All the United Jewish Organizations, we are not the colonialists, they are the colonials. We are not genocidal. They are genocidal by trying to wipe us out from the river to the sea.
I think some of the organizations are addressing that.
Rabbi's organization, but why are not all the Jewish organizations taking? I think if we went on the offensive instead of always on the defensive, we come out a lot better in public opinion than we do. What's happening here?
Some semblance of balance is, coming gradually to organizations like the ADL has the ADL New York office has an actual Frum liaison, an actual Frum guy who's a great guy. But overwhelmingly, the ADL is Jonathan Greenblatt's fiefdom. And he's a good fundraiser who knows bupkis about anti-Semitism. He's not an expert in Yiddishkeit. He's an expert in left-wing progressive politics. That doesn't lead to a person who is willing to acknowledge a left-wing anti-Semitism at its most dangerous. Gradually, Jewish organizations are waking up. But organizations like CJV need to be much louder. We need much more public support because our voice has to be out there leading the spear, because the other organizations, yes, they can be turned around. The AJC, I believe, can be turned around, but they will not turn around until they recognize that organizations like ours are saying things that people actually respect and people realize to be true. Our organization, look at the number of Jewish organizations that have supporters, living supporters, who regret ever giving them money because of what they turned into.
So
an organization
you're
committed to Torah Yiddishkeit, at least you know, if we've been following this for 3,000 years, we're not going to change our sheet
So
of
you're
tomorrow.
saying the problem lies in the fact the majority of Jewish organizations, barring, of course, the CJV and a few other organizations, are not taking the offensive because they don't even understand the offensive. And that's what should be going on.
That is more or
you're
less.
You're going on the offensive and saying, let's talk, as they say, let's talk and say the truth about what it is. They are the colonialists. Their goal is genocide. It has nothing to do with us. You are saying that.
The Biden administration
are saying.
The Biden administration created a strategy to combat anti-Semitism that has done nothing because they labeled CARE a partner in one of the leading anti-Semitic organizations in America. They labeled it a partner in fighting anti-Semitism, and they elevated an anti-Semitic definition of anti-Semitism. Thing called the Nexus. It was created as an alternate to IRA because the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance at least labels anti-Israel bigotry as the anti-Semitism that it actually is. And then the Biden administration went on to create a strategy to combat Islamophobia. Newsflash, nobody has it out for Muslims more than Buddhists and Sikhs and Hindus and any other foreigner until you get to terrorism. And last time I checked, fear of a terrorist dismembering you was not a phobia. It's a legitimate fear. So basically you're claiming that the folks who are fighting Islamic radical anti-Semitism are bigots themselves because they're Islamophobic. That is nonsense.
Okay, Rabbi Menken,
that kind of stuff is what brought us to where we are today.
We have 1 more minute left, and we can't end this show before our audience is informed about the book that you had published, the Everything Torah book. So please tell us a little bit about that before we sign off, because this is something that our audience will find fascinating.
Well, today, if you go to everythingtorah.com, you end up on my personal website. So that's a great way for people to find us. It is a basic introduction to Judaism. It was written for outreach purposes. It's turned out to be a very helpful guide for many. It was written on contract. It's a great little project. It was written, 2004. So quite a while ago. But, find us at CJ Values on your favorite social media or cjvalues.org. And I am personally Y Menken or YaakovMenken.com, just like, that's where everythingtorah.com will lead you.
Right. Okay.
Rabbi, it's been an honor. I just want to see if to finalize that I understood you correctly. The reason why we are not on the offensive and why we're not coming out that way is because the Jewish organizations, the vast majority, are pretty leftist liberal organizations that don't really understand what's really transpiring here. And they don't know what
I'm involved. I happen to be a graduate of Princeton University.
The show is going to shut down, so we need to finish
I became a Baal
now.
Tshuva, but I'm watching other Jews, unfortunately, not get how serious this crisis really is.
Rabbi, it's been an honor, and we hope to have you again really soon because there's a lot more we have to cover.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you for having me.
Good night, ladies and gentlemen.
Good night.
Thank you.